So next up, we have something a little different. As I said, we're going to have a panel of some folks from law enforcement. I see them coming up. And this is Thomas Walden of the DEA, Bobby Flame of the FBI, and Jason Plump of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. And they're going to give a discussion on Whois accuracy and public safety.
Good morning, and thank you to ARIN and the ARIN community for allowing us the ability to speak to you this morning. It's greatly appreciated, and we're hoping that we're going to be very beneficial in describing what our issue is, because this is an issue that we feel is very symbiotic, and we want it to be an issue that is going to be of mutual interest to not only the public safety agencies, not just law enforcement agencies, public safety agencies, but also the ARIN community as well. We know the ARIN community and network operators use the Whois, and there's a lot of people in the community, not just ARIN, but outside of ARIN, who view the Whois strictly as a network operator tool. That was the original purpose. But back when it was created, the original purpose was the internet was basically just for network operators. The public didn't use it, consumers didn't use it, and most of all, criminals didn't use it. And as the world has morphed, so has the uses of the Whois. So we're hoping to describe to you today a little bit about how we as public safety agencies use it. When I say public safety agencies, I'm not just referring to criminal investigators such as the FBI, the DEA, and the RCMP, but also consumer protection agencies such as the Federal Trade Commission, or also civil law enforcement agencies as well, because it is an important tool in how we do attribution, and not only attribution for criminals, but attribution to find victims and help victims as well. So the point of this presentation, we're going to share it. You're going to see a little moving of tables and chairs as we all come to the microphone. But basically, the point of the presentation is to describe how we as public safety agencies use the Whois. We also want to present to you what the current challenges are for public safety agencies in using the Whois. Mostly attribution, being able to locate criminals with due process, legal process, because that is the most important part of this presentation. We are looking to get to the closest downstream provider to the end user through legal process. I think that is something that is going to be stressed, and you're going to hear a lot of that today. The second thing, or the third thing you're going to hear is specific case examples. We have multiple case examples from the DEA and RCMP on how we use the Whois and why it is important to us, and why the speed and the accuracy of it is very important. As you may or may not know, digital evidence is very fleeting, and there's no data retention laws. So there's no requisite or requirement to maintain that information. So being able to get to that information as quickly as possible is very, very important. And lastly, and I guess the most important reason we're here and presenting to you, is so that we can work together with the ARIN community to develop a mutually beneficial policy on Whois, so we can get to the granularity, specifically the reallocations to the downstream providers that will provide us with that accuracy. We know that there's a lot of Whois policies that have been put forth before, that aren't currently in place, but unfortunately it's still not, I think, achieving the desired results. And what we're hoping is that through a new international, globally coordinated policy that would get to that accuracy would be helpful to not only the public safety agencies, but also to the ARIN community as well. So I just wanted to introduce the concepts to you, but I'm going to hand the microphone over to Tom Walden from the Drug Enforcement Administration. Thank you.
Good morning. As Bobby said, my name is Thomas Walden, Supervisory Special Agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration. And we're going to start off here with the use of Whois. Beyond the traditional RIR communities present here, the Whois has numerous other public uses. We realize the original creation of the Whois may not have been for these purposes, but much like the internet itself, the evolution of Whois makes it a critical and valuable resource beyond its original use. The Whois directory, as you can see, ensures IP addresses are registered. We also have the security and reliability of the network, which is predicated upon the accuracy of the points of contact. We also have these entities, as you see here, who various entities who appreciate this information when they come in contact with issues regarding the misuse and abuse. We as public safety groups, including law enforcement, rely heavily on Whois at the beginning of our investigations. And I want to stress that it's just a beginning point for us. And more importantly, we rely on it when we try to serve a legal process to ensure that we're providing to the correct service provider. Without data retention laws, speed is important because data may not be held and may become stale. We look at the public safety uses of Whois. As I said earlier, it's one of the many tools that we utilize. It's the lowest common denominator, it's the starting point for all of us. We also use the routing tables, commercially available tools, and then tools that we develop in and amongst ourselves. When you look at Whois, when you look at these type of investigations, we have senior level, or should I say more experienced investigators along with our intel analysts that may use these more advanced tools, but our common everyday investigators tend to begin and end with Whois because it is the most commonly used resource that they have. Now, when you look at the issues at hand here, we have several. We want to start off with the suballocations of these IP addresses and the impact that has upon the timely responses for our judicial, our subpoenas and our judicial requirements. We also, RRs tend to have different policies and requirements for what information they retain regarding these suballocations, and that comes into effect because you end up wasting time when we serve these judicial requests to the wrong or to an entity that was the original allocation as opposed to the suballocated entity. And we end up kind of chasing our own tail because we serve it to the one that comes up, but it may not be the end allocated area where we need to serve it to. We have the problem is expanding with that because of the IPv6, with more and more ISPs may never come back to the IR from the initial. Let me get myself together here. The IPv6 is the first step because the ISPs may never come back to the IR for more space, and they may not register the suballocation. Following that up, we have the IETF modern, which is the shift to VoIP. And then we also have the Internet of Things with the increased number of IP addresses that are being given out, with so many more devices being given IP addresses. That's something else that we're going to encounter. And we're seeking to work with ARIN and the other RIRs within the community to come to the best solution to this problem. Now, we as public safety agencies, we need to stress that we don't want allocation information for the end user. And as Bobby stated earlier, what we're looking for is only the downstream ISP closest to the customer so that we can serve the legal process to them. And I can't stress that enough, that we only want that information. We don't want the actual allocated information for the end user. When it comes to the additional challenges we have, we want to know that we don't want to waste the network and the ISP's time and resources by serving legal processes on the wrong providers. It takes time and effort from the operators. It takes time and effort away from our legal process and our legal requests, and they shouldn't have to burden. They shouldn't be burdened with either of those things. The excess use of our limited resources also takes away from our investigations, which we could be working on by having to chase down these suballocated, trying to track down to the end suballocated point. Now we have a couple case examples here. The first one that I'm going to go over is one that Bobby had. It's for an FBI case. And in this instance, as you can see, a group was using inaccurate Whois information to conduct a spam campaign with millions of dollars in financial losses. They would use inaccurate Whois data and outdated info to work with bad IP brokers and reroute IP addresses of defunct companies. Once sites were redirected to them, they would create false letters of authorization from those defunct companies, transferring the IP addresses to themselves. They would then use them for spam campaigns. I guess it started in July of 2013, and as you can see there, it's kind of broken down. With DEA, a lot of our investigations are active and ongoing. So what I did was I just kind of looked at some statistics. And when we looked at it, we saw that time doesn't always amount to money. And I'm talking about time and the exigency of an investigation. It sometimes equates to lives. We looked at just the past few months, some areas where there were numerous drug overdoses. And when we looked at these statistics and the number of people that had these issues, we find that these public safety organizations, and that would be a lot of the investigators, they have to work as quickly as possible to establish a pattern of life for that individual to see who they were in contact with, so we can use that to track back to their source of supply. And by doing that, we're trying to find the source before they sell to someone else, and we're trying not so there won't be additional victims added to this person who brought this to the forefront or to our attention to begin with. I'm going to hand it off now to Jason, who's going to give an overview of an RCMP investigation.
Thanks, Tom. As Bobby and Tom mentioned, my name is Jason Plump. I'm with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Technological Crime Program in Ottawa. So I'll try to keep away from some of the Canadian stereotypes that have been brought up. I think somebody mentioned the use of the word "a," so I'll try to stay away from that. Although I did go to a hockey game last night, so maybe some of those stereotypes are true. So last week I was riding to work on my moose, talking to my pet wolf, and and we were discussing the Spencer decision. And the Spencer decision from I think it was 11 Canadians that were in the room. That was the number yesterday. They'll probably understand what the Spencer decision is. In June 2016, the Supreme Court of Canada came down with a decision in the Spencer case, which we call it Regina versus Spencer. It was a child pornography case where the law enforcement used an act that they probably shouldn't have. And they got the end user information, it went to court, the conviction stood up, but the Supreme Court of Canada came back and said, you cannot get end user data without a judicial authorization, without a warrant. So I think it's been stressed by Bobby, it's been stressed by Tom, that we're not looking for end user data because as Canadian law enforcement, we can't get it anyway without a warrant. So we're looking for the ISP closest to the subject that we're looking for. And the Spencer decision, it's written out in stone for us from the Supreme Court of Canada that we can't get that information. And personally, I don't want my information on an open Whois anyway. And that's from a law enforcement person. And we don't want to, we're not looking to, circumvent that process in any sort of way. We'll do the work, we'll write the production order to get that information as a result of the Spencer decision. But we need to know what law enforcement jurisdiction is to write that and who to send it to. So the National Child Exploitation Coordination Center, which sits in Ottawa, to date in 2016 has this is to the end of September, has almost 20,000 referrals for Canadian IP addresses that are either or the vast majority are either downloading or uploading child pornography. That's a huge problem. So as the Child Exploitation Coordination Center gets these referrals, their first thing that they do is try to locate where that IP is so that they can identify who the law enforcement jurisdiction is. And whether it could be from St. John's, Newfoundland, the Newfoundland Constabulary, or it could be in Victoria, the Victoria Police, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, and all points in between. So we need to know where that is so we can point the law enforcement jurisdiction in the right direction and say, this is a problem in your area, you have to deal with it. And as a result of that, they will lay paper, they will come up with a production order to the ISP and say, look, these are the reasons set out, signed by a judge, and this is what we need. And that is the information that we need, is the basic subscriber information. So that Whois check is the first step in any investigation usually that we do. So it's very important to us. Whois is also used to search for victims. So in a recent case, we had 33,000 Canadian IP addresses affected by ransomware. That case is not going to go to the RCMP, and we're not going to search 33,000. We'll send that off to our CERT, which is called CSIRT, the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center, and they'll do that mitigation strategy between themselves and the banks, or depending upon the case. So finding victims is also as important as finding suspects in a lot of cases. So to bring this down to kind of a level that we can all understand and perhaps all appreciate, in March 2016, Canadian law enforcement had an investigation into a man extorting a young female for nude and sexualized videos. Okay? It took 4 production orders and 3 months to obtain the suspect's information because the Whois database was not accurate. The sub-allocations of those IP blocks was not in Whois. So we would go, for instance, to a large ISP, for perhaps Rogers, TELUS, Bell, and go to them and they'd say, no, that's not us, it was reallocated somewhere else. And then it was reallocated somewhere else. So it took 3 months for law enforcement and 4 production orders to get what probably should have been 1 production order if the Whois database was up to date. So the arrest came in June 2016, but that's 3 months where this person the young female was victimized for 3 months, and this person was free to victimize others. So those are the types of events that we're trying to get rid of. We want to be able to find the jurisdiction, find the ISP, and deal with these issues and deal with these investigations quickly and efficiently. And we as law enforcement, public safety, we have a duty to protect the citizens, but we really focus on the most vulnerable of our society, and that's children, and that's the elderly. So our policy proposal and the policy principles that we want to get into, and hopefully we'll have something together by the spring of 2017. The policy principles require registration of all IP sub-allocations to downstream ISPs, so entire chain of sub-allocations are accurately reflected in the Whois. And I think we've identified and told you how important this is, so that we're not wasting time and victims aren't being re-victimized due to these time delays in our investigations. So as I mentioned, as a result of Spencer and the U.S. has similar case law, we will not disclose end-user information, but instead focus on downstream ISP providing connectivity to the end user. So as I said, we're not looking for that basic subscriber information. We're looking for the ISP closest to the end user. So this benefits the entire community. We're not the only ones that use the Whois database. It provides both public and private sector communities with effective incident response. And ways to ensure adherence to policy requirements, we're looking at finding ways to come up with some sort of incentives. It's the carrot or the stick analogy, right? We want to use the carrot as opposed to a stick, and try to come up with some sort of incentives that helps us keep the Whois database accurate. So the way forward, it's a globally coordinated effort with the IRRs and public safety organizations. So LACNIC and APNIC have both been done. The Costa Rican Police and the DEA did a presentation in September in 2016. APNIC was done by the Sri Lankan Police in October 2016. ARIN, we're here today with you. RIPE NCC, I think we have Greg Munier on the line who works at Europol. He's going to be doing this presentation next week in Spain with the Guardia Civil, and it'll be done next week. They're going to be doing a similar presentation to RIPE NCC. And AFRINIC will be done hopefully in December 2016 with the Mauritius Police and the African Union. So this is not just us coming to ARIN doing this. We're doing this across the 5 RIRs and trying to get that message out there. So the goal is to introduce a unified policy proposal in the spring of 2017. a draft with the help of 5 RIR communities and submit at RIR meetings in spring 2017. We don't want to do this alone. We're looking for input from across the community and all the stakeholders within the community, and to collaborate with ARIN and the other RIRs communities for industry-led solution. Bobby, I think you're up. Thank you very much.
Yes, I was just gonna conclude, just to say that we wanted to, like Jason was saying, we wanted to work with the RI community, especially you right here in the ARIN community, to develop a policy that would address some of the concerns that you heard today. I think from Tom and Jason, you heard good examples of how we use it, why we use it, and the current state of play and where we're trying to go. So we hope that presentation was very helpful, and we really hope that you can assist us in trying to move forward towards the spring of 2017. So thank you on behalf of all of us, and absolutely questions, and I see people are lining up. So you have Alain.
Alain, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alain Durand from ICANN, speaking on my own behalf as usual. I have a question for you and maybe a suggestion. The question is, you've been talking about accuracy related to sub-delegation. All across the IRs, there have been discussions when they are related to transfers, or more specifically to things that are not transferred because they are through private contract or letter of authorization. My question to you is, how much of a problem does this create for you?
To try to paraphrase, if one party decides that they're not going to transfer the address block in the registry, but instead they're going to lease them the address space, so it still shows up in Party A's name, but Party B is actually routing it, is that problematic? That's not a transfer. It's not in Whois, but it's operational use of the address space. Wouldn't that also be a problem? Over.
Oh.
There you go.
All right, sorry. Apologies. No, anytime that it's an operational case and we're looking for that instant information regarding who to serve that legal process to, and we can't get to it for whatever the reason is, then yes, it's a problem.
Okay, thank you for clarification. And now, a recommendation that I wanted to offer. I've, for a long time, been participated also to IETF communities. And when you go to the IETF, there's a process to documents, and you need to have some considerations. I mean, some security consideration, IANA consideration. So the idea is, why not have a Whois accuracy consideration every time one of the IRR look at a policy?
To make sure I understand, when there's right now we do a staff review, which staff and legal review, which talks about whether we can implement the policy. You're asking for a security consideration as a result of the policy.
Correct.
Okay, that's certainly something the AC can decide to assess for each policy. Find AC members and talk to them. It's totally up to them what they decide to put in the policy.
My suggestion is to make it as part of a process.
Right, and that if they wish that, we're happy to make the change. Next, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Aronson. I've been working with Bobby and Aranga on this, and I just wanted to say that we've had so many Whois accuracy policies that had nothing to do with Whois accuracy, and I'm so excited that you guys are actually presenting, what you need this for, how do we solve the problem, and sort of getting the community involved in anything I can do to help. Super happy to help. But it's great to have the problem defined in all the regions so that we don't have policies that don't actually solve your issues. So it's super cool.
Okay, far right microphone.
Peter Timish with Adrex. I kind of wanted to give a historical review because one of the things I think we're missing here is there's really two Whoises with ARIN alone, and they are completely different. But ARIN inherited the Internet database in 1997. In our review of the ARIN registrations from 1997 onward, we find it to be extremely accurate, very well managed. The points of contact are almost always in this room. You're going to have a high rate of accuracy in that version of the public Whois. The 34,000 allocations that were given out between 1983 and 1997 are extremely low in accuracy. Most of them are never in this room. Their blocks are almost always in someone else's hands. They've been assumed by many things. So part of the discussion may be trying to determine it's not this room. This room does a great job. There's no one here I know that doesn't do a great job of managing their information. It's the people not in this room that don't have an understanding of it, who received those number blocks so many years ago, and it almost assumes to be there's two separate Whoises. And I've talked to John about this a lot. There are completely separate rules for how they're managed. So one of the things in this room is to try to find a way to assume and bring the inherited record in so that it will be able to be updated. And that's kind of where we want to make sure that we keep that in mind. It's not the ones that ARIN has managed, it's the ones that came before it.
Center front.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, ARIN AC. For the panel, I got a couple of questions. And it's kind of like, what are your priorities and some things for you to think about? You talk about ISPs. There are lots of other kinds of network operators, like universities and all sorts of other things. So as you're thinking about how you want to deal with this, make sure you include those kind of other operators and what you want from them. And then what the right level, so you don't want residential customer information, but do you want enterprise network operation centers, or do you only want the ISPs to service them? And then what kind of ones? Yeah.
May I ask is the more general term service provider appropriate?
Well, possibly. Or network operator.
Right. So, I mean, we use those terms fairly interchangeably in this room. Which do you want them to use?
Well, I don't know which we want them to use. And I don't think I care. What I think is more important is whatever they use, that they have a pretty reasonable definition of what they think they mean by it. And not leave it open to too much interpretation. And then I thought I heard you wanting to know what jurisdiction IP addresses are used in. Is that correct?
I didn't hear that.
So the IP, we want to know what the jurisdiction is of the ISP.
Okay.
So, for instance, if the ISP is located in Toronto, that's what we would like to know. Not necessarily where the end user is. It's just where we can serve that due process, that production order to, and what law enforcement agency needs to do that. So we don't need to know right off the bat where the basic subscriber is, or where the
so you just want an accurate address for the provider in order to provide service to them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, NRO-NC. First thing, I had a suggestion yesterday at open mic in regards to the Whois service. And Bobby, you talked about the fact that the data is fleeting and constantly changing. I would strongly recommend possibly putting in a suggestion to ARIN to amend the terms of use to allow the access to the Whois for that purpose. That will give you back to every time there's a change on everything. So just a suggestion there. I did appreciate the moose and wolf. I'm more in Toronto, I'm more of a raccoon garbage guy myself, but ISP, what David said a minute ago, is absolutely going to be the wrong word, especially in Canada. TSP is about as close as we can get, the CRTC's definition of it, but even then, that is wrong and stale dated. There are many types of companies that offer services that don't define themselves as an internet service provider. And if they don't define themselves, therefore, they don't care. So as we move in to the, into the later years, I think the term ISP is becoming a generic term that doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means, and be very careful of that term. We need to, if you do want to do what you're talking about, you want to expand on that definition.
Do you have language you'd recommend for them?
No, I would, like I said, I would look at this in Canada at least, the CRTC's definition, because it's a very encompassing definition, far more than what people in this room would consider an ISP. That's really the only suggestion there. And the other thing is, you mentioned CSIRC. They have an incredible ability to find us. Far better than anybody I've seen. We get lots of notifications from them, and they've done a very good job.
Yep.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I can absolutely appreciate that CSIRC does that, but they're more on the mitigation side, and they fall under public safety. However, they're not an investigative body. And in order for us to use their vast resources, I mean, there are other agencies in Canada that have eyes and ears, other places as well, but from an investigational standpoint, the RCMP has to do those things, and if we reach out to CSIRC, usually it's on a mitigation side because the criminal investigation has fallen through.
What I'm saying is, by CSIRC notifying us, they have the IP to ISP mapping, and which might be outside of just public records, but at least the mapping of the ISP to that IP.
Jabber?
Thank you. I've got a couple of comments from Jason Schiller, Google ASOAC. First is question for John. Resources under RSA are accurate because they need accurate billing contact. This acts as a yearly keep alive. What are your thoughts on a non-monetary keep alive for resources not under RSA? And then I'll have another once you answer that.
A non-monetary keep alive. I'm not sure what that phrase refers to. The challenge, of course, is a resource not under RSA. If we send them a reminder, asking, we do POC validation, for example, and they don't respond, it's a keep alive, but it doesn't necessarily have any effect. So I think we need a more concrete suggestion in order to evaluate that.
Okay.
So we'll front mic, and I'm going to close the queues, folks. We policy track coming this morning, and we're going to run right through it at this rate. Queues are closing.
And I have one more Jabber comment also from Jason. Also note that end users may have a direct assignment, so there might not be an upstream providing a delegation of the address.
Right. Acknowledge. Okay, Senator.
Andrew Dahl, CrowdStrike. I think the keys to success here are probably not using the terms end user and ISP at all, but instead probably finding language and terms that define exactly who needs to provide records and who does not need to provide records. So I think you were very clear in your commentary that we don't want residential and user records, but do you want corporate records for large or even small corporate reassignments? Those could be valuable. Maybe you want them, maybe you don't. I don't know, but I think we should try to stay away from those terms that are probably undefined and used very differently in different regions. I mean, the term LIR is used in the RIPE region to mean ISP. So we need to define what we want, I think probably in new terms and new language to get what we want.
Okay.
Gary Campbell, Government of Jamaica. Two quick questions. One, you intend to have this policy ready by spring 2017. Would that be the final policy, or would it be just a draft? Secondly, for the 5 RIRs, is it that each would be developing a specific policy, or will you have one comprehensive policy? And a spin-off from that, is there a role for governments and academia in any of this?
Actually, why don't I jump in there? So, by definition, each RIR establishes its own policy for how it operates its registry. We do have policies that are roughly coordinated among the regions, but each region develops its own, so it would be, even if a framework was introduced in all 5 RIRs, each RIR would take that to its own conclusion. Regarding the role of government and academia, we welcome them in this policy process. If you want to participate in the policy development in ARIN, it's open to everyone, and we'd welcome governments to participate here. ARIN has a government working group, of course, that'll be informed about this activity and may participate on the floor in its discussion. Rear mic. That's you, ARIN.
Just making sure. ARIN Whois, ARIN Board. First, thank you very much for participating as a stakeholder with this community. Really appreciate you coming up here and bringing this problem in front of us. It's going to be a great discussion. My understanding, based on your challenges and goals, is we're really talking about the future, primarily related to V6 and subsequent allocations and motivation to keep data up to date. I saw a question in there that said incentives, and I don't think you're going to have any challenges in the policy community on getting something passed. And at the end of the day, whether that says may or must is probably not the relevant topic. More importantly, in my opinion, is how are we actually going to get people to execute? My suggestion is that we spend some time doing some outreach with other monetary stakeholders that have the same challenges. As a simple example, banks and credit card companies use IP information for geo information to help identify that you're not committing fraud and you're using a transaction in a specific location. It might be useful to reach out to those communities to bring them in here, operational communities and RIR communities, to help incentivize operators to keep things up to date, not just to create policy. So I don't have a large list off the top of my head, but I think a good place would be to start with looking at geolocation companies, find all the people that pay geolocation companies, find some real monetary incentive to back up a driver for the ISPs to keep that information up to date.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that, because that is a very big issue. There are already existing Whois policies, and the problem has been the incentivization and the enforcement part. So that is going to be a key component of how we not only have a policy, but also make sure that it's effective. So thank you for that, and that is a great suggestion.
Far left mic, go ahead.
Joe Provo, Google AC candidate. A lot of discussion on access providers, LAR, ISP, however you want to call it. Can you touch on briefly, because we don't have a huge amount of time, the role that jurisdiction of tunnels, broker, VPN providers, and that sort of thing might play in what you're concerned about?
You're talking, when you say tunnels, what specifically are you referring to, like Toreto tunnels, or?
I didn't want to open up too much of a can of worms, but whether it's V6 tunnel brokers that happen to be in the U.S., regardless where their end users are, whether it's folks who are, some of the folks who temporary, ephemeral use of addresses for potentially illegal things sometimes are done through leased GRE or IPsec, VPN, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that is that's a huge challenge, and I think what we are trying to address here is really the most simple form of the inaccuracy, because we realize there's a lot of proxy servers, there's a lot going on the dark web, and that is such a huge and complex problem that we are just trying to, go step by step. And this is the easiest step, if, and that's a very loose term, obviously, but it's the most direct and easiest step that we could work with the ARIN community on. What you're talking about is, a little bit more sophisticated methods and going into other avenues, which are very necessary as well, and we do acknowledge them. But that would require a lot more strategy, a lot more tactics with people even outside of this community. So we acknowledge it, but I think for right now, we're just trying to take baby steps, if you will, and this is one big baby step in that direction.
Okay, thank you. And final speaker at the mic is Council.
This is Steve Ryan. I'm not speaking for ARIN right now, but I thought we ought to thank the law enforcement agencies for taking this approach to us, which is a policy-based approach through self-governance, as opposed to another governmental approach, which is that they pass a law and tell you to do it, and that there'll be a fine if you don't do it. And so I think the opportunity for us is to work with a legitimate problem whenever we find it, whether that problem is raised by civil society people who I think have actually an even greater stake in this if you're a content owner, that data be there because they don't have the resources of law enforcement to persist in finding the right person. And so as we go forward, this is an opportunity, I think, for the community through self-governance. There is another opportunity, which is we could get a law jammed down our throats. And so we just, I think, have to think about that as we reflect on what the appropriate policy response is.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our panelists.